So with that, I will jump to the next topic on our agenda and introduce to you Nancy Furness and Katie Curtis. They are from Snohomish County, and they are here to give us some of their experiences and lessons learned from the mudslide that took place near Oso. And so another opportunity to learn from real-world responses and lessons learned from actual events. So thank you. And for the slides.
Okay, well, I hope I'm okay. Thank you all for inviting us out here to talk about our response. Nancy and I are from the Snohomish Health District, so we're going to be talking about the Health District's response. If you want the emergency management side of things, or search and rescue, or law enforcement, we're certainly more than happy to provide you with contacts for those people, but that's kind of outside of our scope, so we won't be talking about that.
Oh, here.
So, on March 2nd, it was a Saturday, at about 10:30 in the morning, a mudslide occurred. And it was about a mile long, stopped up the North Fork of the Stillaguamish River. I actually first heard about this on Twitter. I was scrolling through my Twitter feed and saw landslide in Snohomish County. I thought, oh, that's interesting. I went about my day, and then later on I got the announcement from our disaster medical control center that they'd been stood up, and I thought, oh, maybe this is a bigger deal than my little tiny blurb on Twitter made it out to be. So it's kind of interesting how we all became notified about this event. We're going to see if this works. So this is a video from the USGS. And if you look up in the top corner, up there at the top, it shows in seconds how fast they think this slide moved. So it just kind of came down like a wave and hit kind of a bowl and sloshed and came back down. And they figured that that mud hit these houses at about 60 miles an hour. So it was really moving.
I'm going to show the beginning part again.
Yeah.
It's so impactful.
Yeah.
Wow.
So just the force and power of all of that mud, rain-soaked mud, just slammed through that valley. And it didn't stop until it hit the natural kind of curve of the valley. So this is an overlay of the housing parcels. So this is, you've probably heard a lot about it. This is the Steelhead Haven community. And not all of these are where there are actual houses, but these are property parcels. Some of these had just acreage that didn't have a house on it. But as you can see in the middle, this is where all of the victims were living. And as it came through, and then the Stillaguamish over here, and all of those houses over there got flooded. And this is just kind of an aerial view after the fact of the mudslide. All of this standing water they had to deal with, and since then the river's kind of made its own new pathway through there, and they've been working with the Army Corps of Engineers to try and figure out what are they going to do, because if we get a lot of rain this fall, we're going to see that exact same flooding pattern, and there's still houses there that weren't damaged. They were flooded, but they weren't destroyed, so the people were able to clean up and in some cases move back in.
Katie, could you point out the road real quick, the actual SR 530?
Yeah. Is there a laser pointer?
I don't know that.
Oh,
There we go.
Yes, there is.
so it looks,
I'm trying to see where it is.
I can't. I don't think it's here. It's supposed to be be right through here.
Yeah.
Oh,
Is where it would be. And they've reopened it now. Both directions, both lanes are all open on Tuesday. So yeah, it just all gone. And when they started initially clearing it, they thought the whole roadway had just been wiped out. But after they moved off a lot of the mud, there were just some patches where they had to replace it. But for the most part, the road was still there under the mud.
So as Katie mentioned, she heard about this event on Twitter. I was at home on a Saturday morning, and I got a phone call from the Medical Reserve Corps coordinator, who is an employee of the health department, but she has her office at emergency management. She called me and said, Nancy, there's been a slide. Well, in our area, it's like, so what? We have slides all the time. It's always going over the railroad track or by the Puget Sound. So for me to hear that there's a slide is not a big deal. And she said, no, this sounds worse. And a few minutes later, called back and she said, they're saying it could be catastrophic. So I said, do I need to come in? Are they activating ESF8? Because she said the Emergency Operations Center was being activated. And she checked with the EOC manager, and the answer was no. So ESF8 was not activated until Monday evening. Yeah. So one lesson learned. But we actually dealt with the response with me at home and the volunteer coordinator at the emergency management, and did all of our work on Saturday in that way. So we were doing ESF8 like, from home setting. So the first questions that I started asking were, well, how big is this slide? If they're saying it's catastrophic, how big is it? How many people were involved? Because we didn't know at that time that, at least I didn't know that there were all these houses involved. We didn't know how many people were on the road. We didn't know how many homes, say, were involved. There were houses that were permanent homes. There were houses that were vacation homes that people were in and out from. This was being a weekend. How many are there even on their weekend homes? So there were a lot of unknowns about that. So how many are hurt, missing? Is there a potential for fatalities? And this was still a question at this point. Within hours, we knew that there were going to be fatalities, and it really did go quickly from a search and rescue type event to the recovery of the bodies. We knew that there were some people, we were hearing reports that as they came in, some people were being taken to hospitals. Where were they being taken? And understanding that this mile of mud now over the road isolated two communities. So on one side of the mudslide was the Darrington area, which is a very rural area to us, and they had to go up north into Skagit County and around, and it took several hours to make that tour around to get to the other side. And then on the Arlington side and to the west, we had the hospitals, and we didn't know how many people were being driven to hospitals. We had helicopters starting to rescue some people, and there's some dramatic stories about the rescues that have happened and that those people were taken to hospitals. So we really didn't know where are they going, how many are going, all these unknowns. So I called the hospital control, Providence Hospital, which is our primary DMCC, called the head guy on his cell phone and said, head back to the hospital, I want DMCC opened, because we did not know what was going to happen. Interestingly, because there were so few injuries, in the big picture of things, there were so few people actually taken to the hospital for the injuries, that DMCC was not busy. They activated, I think, around 2 in the afternoon by the time they got activated, and they called me at 8 o'clock and said, we're not being utilized, we're shutting down. And that was the only time that we used DMCC. Oh, I think I got this. We did activate the Medical Reserve Corps volunteers to support emergency call center operations. Calls were coming in. people, you can imagine the people who knew their family members or their loved ones or friends were at their homes on Steel Haven Drive, and we had a lot of people just calling to say, have you heard from whoever? And we had many, many calls coming in, many times with just first names of people. So I'll get into some of the tracking in a few minutes. Again, ESF-8 was not officially activated until late Monday. And that was really with Katie and somebody else at the Emergency Operations Center, and they said, oh, we'll activate you. So hopefully our area has learned a lot of lessons about the value of ESF-8 and what we can do and why we need to be in there earlier, not later. So on Sunday morning, reports of persons missing continued to come in. Another challenge was many people were taking reports, many groups, Red Cross, law enforcement, the call center, various places were taking reports of missing people. And we didn't know if they were really missing. Were they in the mud? Were they just, did somebody just not know where they were and they were just calling? And we had the potential for, I think we were estimating up to 170 names one morning that we could be getting that day. It didn't get quite that bad, but there was no cellular service and no internet service. So if I would have somebody that I knew lived in the area, I'd be calling saying, have you heard from John? We just didn't have they didn't have the way to communicate with the people they were trying to track. So were individuals really missing, or were they just unreachable due to no service? Unfortunately, the vast majority were just simply unreachable. So on Sunday, by Sunday morning, we had 7 confirmed deaths, 8 reported injured, and 54 unaccounted for and possibly growing, with the estimate of 30 to 38 homes damaged. And the medical examiner's office at this point was in surge capacity and calling for help. A Medical Reserve Corps volunteer and I went up and spent the day Sunday doing interviews of the families or contacts of the missing people, those that we really knew at this point were on Steel Haven and were probably, if they had their house destroyed, if they were there. So we began interviewing family members and getting the demographics. What did they wear, hair color, eye color, surgical scars, just about 7 pages worth of questions, just every identifying feature possible. Not to be gruesome, but every detail was necessary because these bodies were coming in not whole, it wasn't a normal death in a hospital bed type of thing, and we needed every detail possible. Tattoos were fascinating. We had people with tattoos and very unique tattoos, and that was very much a descriptive help in identifying the people as they came in. So we had the staff again sent to help with the family interviews. We had multiple requests from other agencies on the status of family assistance centers. And this was another big challenge that we really ended up unresolved, and we're doing some family assistance center planning now. The county executive went in front of media and said a family assistance center was going to be set up on Tuesday. In the county's plan, and I knew what this plan was and thought all along, this will never work if we really need to have it. The medical examiner's office was the one responsible for the family assistance center. Well, they are the ones who are in the middle of the crisis, and they don't have time to deal with the family assistance center. They needed public help, and they needed just public support overall. So we are actually planning now. We've got people at the table, and we're in the midst of actually doing a family assistance center that will support the medical examiner's office, not rely on them to do that work. There was also a request for family assistance center in both Arlington and Darrington. And remember, this road is blocked by the miles, so we have all these miles to go around and all these hours to drive with scarce resources and scarce people to get to both sides. So that was another big challenge. Very much like in our area where an earthquake would happen, and we know those roads are going to go out. And so it was a real taste of within 1 mile of how a road can go out, what a whole area could be. On the 24th, 2 days later, these are sheriff's office representatives, and they came in to the medical examiner's office and began helping us with the missing persons. And this was one of the best steps taken in the early days. They are experts in missing persons. They know what they're doing. They know how to track, and they know what information to get. So you can see the papers up on the board, and that was all lines of information that we had been collecting and all the demographics and information, and then they were putting it up into an Excel spreadsheet. So when the medical examiner staff came in and said, we have someone with X, Y, and Z features, they could start looking at that form and find out who meets that description and give them a preliminary identification, or at least where to start on. But these two guys from the sheriff's office were incredible when it came to missing persons. We did start having requests for people who would come up and help with the family assistance, because again, the county executive had said, this is happening, and we're scrambling like who, how, where, you know, all the questions, because we were not prepared for that. So we actually had a woman from Public Health Seattle-King County, Ashley, come up, and she was a great support to us, and they've got all of their plans for their family assistance in place. So we could have struggled at that point and gotten something in place, but we actually, the best part of this, I think, was actually activating the public health interjurisdictional agreement. And public health agencies throughout the state have signed on to this agreement, but it's never had to be activated. So we were one of, I think, the first, if not close to the first, to actually activate that plan for the first time and call Seattle-King County and say, we need your help, and we used that plan for their staff to come up. So they provided numerous documents, and we would have used that for family assistance, and we are actually using those documents for our planning now. So the health district continued to work on this family assistance planning, literally one day, one 8-hour day of trying to figure out how we were going to do this, and at the end of the day deciding it was not going to happen. So it was a futile day. But we did push out messages to response agencies about why that decision was made. Again, we're going against the word of the county executive, but that was a real struggle for us to figure out just overall how to do that center and that assistance. The other thing with this is that families were not looking to us so much for help. This is an area of the county. They're rural, they're independent, they're friends, they support each other, they take care of each other, and they don't rely on us big city folks, in all honesty, to take care of them. So they were gathering at homes, they were gathering at community centers, meals were being held together, information was being shared together, so they had a very unique setup that was really better supporting them than what anybody from public health or anybody else could really come in and enter their environment that they were really working well with. Let's see, so on the 27th, so we're 5 days into it, request still came in. Mental health, behavioral health resources for family and responders was a big issue. These responders were out 5 days by this point in the very worst of conditions, seeing things that they never dreamed of seeing, and there were a lot of mental health issues. We did have critical incident management systems and Red Cross, Green Cross, various federal resources coming in to help with the mental health. And then public health really got involved with an environmental health side of things. Food inspections for the responders that were out. We got a call one day that there was a foodborne outbreak among the responders, and that sent panic to environmental health pretty quickly because we didn't want these guys out having bad food and getting sick. So we found out that it truly was not a foodborne illness. It wasn't food, but we had to be very careful trying to get people to not donate homemade whatever and things that weren't refrigerated or heated properly. You know, out of the goodness of their heart, they're trying to help, but we had to keep our responders safe. Septic issues were a big issue, trying to figure out what septic systems right at the end where all the flooding was have been damaged. Not so much with the slide. We knew those houses were gone, but where the flooding was going to hit and how many more houses, septics and wells were a big issue. And we're just winding down on that work now 6 months later. Lots of hazardous material questions. Hazardous material in the form of just all the household chemicals that you have at your house. Gas tanks. This is a rural area, so there's septic, there's oil tanks, there's propane tanks, all the stuff for country living. And this all washed down, so there was a lot of issue about hazardous material questions. And then the medical examiner's office continued to have additional resource requests. We found that they only had an agreement with Pierce County. I think they also had one with King, but they did not have extensive agreements throughout the state for help with each other, and that's one thing we're trying to encourage DOH and others to start helping us with the process to get a mutual aid agreement so that they don't have to do the paperwork at the time that it was needed. Am I taking out your stuff, Katie?
Nope.
Okay. I tend to ramble and then I go into replies. So environmental health staff, we sent out to inspect food trucks, as I mentioned, at the instant command posts. We continue to provide health district staff to the medical examiner's office to assist with contacting the families. There's Katie's time.
Okay, so I'm going to take you through some pictures of the working conditions that the first responders were having to deal with and that thus public health was having to deal with. So here is a picture of the workers, and you can see right through here they had to put wooden boards down out through the mud because it was just a horrible, soggy, muddy mess that they were having to slog through every day. And it's raining and it's cold, and they had all of this mud. And you can see there's just giant piles, and they were trying to dig down, looking for household items, looking for the victims. And so there was a lot of heavy equipment out there and a lot of people.
And we had record rains, so this added to the problem. It was record rains in March.
Yeah. One of the things that was a big concern for the first responders is what are they coming into contact with? They knew there were septic systems out there, so are they going to be walking through septic waste? Are they going to come into contact with hazardous materials? Really, there was a point in time where, now it's kind of funny, but then it was so stressful. People were treating this like a Superfund site. Like it was highly contaminated nuclear waste, and it's like there's so much mud mixed in that if these septic systems did happen to be moved and opened, all of that fecal material, it's all mixed in with the mud, so it's pretty diluted. But still, it's a concern for people, and our environmental health staff spend a lot of time doing education. So we have some pictures we pulled from the Seattle Times. We poached these. You can see that the workers were just covered in mud when they would get done at the end of the day. They were having to sort through lots of lumber, some housing debris. Those houses were pretty obliterated. It wasn't like giant walls and things like that. It was just bits and pieces of stuff that they were having to sort through. And they did a really great job of when they would find household items, personal items. They collected them all in one area. They had a whole team to clean them up and return them to the family members if they wanted them. So you can see just these big piles of debris that were out there that they were having to work through. And they had to sort through all these piles. So we had to make sure that people had their tetanus vaccination because potentially they could be injured out on the debris site. Some of the structures towards the edges that were somewhat damaged, they were having to go through.
And the dog going through up on the right there, it's kind of hard to see.
Yeah. And eventually they put little booties on the dogs. There was one day, Nancy and I were out on site, and we were driving past these little tiny piles. And the guy said, "Oh, those are cars." They were like this big. They had just, and it wasn't that they had compacted them. The earth had compacted these cars into unrecognizable little metal balls. It was crazy. So as you can see, more of the debris field, what they're having to go through. And then eventually they brought in an enormous amount of gravel and put it out there to try and have some areas where the first responders could wash off every day and park their cars and do the things they needed to get done outside of the mud. And this is just a shot. You can see, I think this is more towards the edge.
So when you see those mud piles and all the debris, to me it's still mind-boggling that they found all 43 people that were missing. There were 42 found, and then finally in July, I believe it was, the final person was found. So they did an awesome job. So we'll talk a little bit about mutual aid. I mentioned a little bit about the medical examiner's office requesting mutual aid and how we requested mutual aid through the public health agreement. The request was made for additional medical examiner personnel through Pierce County, and again, that was one of the biggest needs of the entire event. Snohomish County and King County Medical Examiner's Office had the mutual aid contract in place, and Snohomish and Pierce quickly put an agreement in place to deploy the assistance. One of the neat things that I had the opportunity to see on Sunday, and in fact I'll have a picture of it coming up, so I'll tell you in a second. So the state pushed on federal assistance. We did have parts of a DMORT team that were brought in to help, and we always hear about the help coming in, think we're going to need this help, but it was really a challenge. We'd never had the experience before of how do you deal with all of these outside agencies coming in, and every outside agency has a different way of doing things. Well, do the feds do things our way, or do we start doing things the feds' way? And there were a lot of issues around that, just trying to figure out how to work together as they came in, because there were so many that coming in so quickly. This was a tent set up by the medical examiner's office out in the field. When a body was found, a horn would blow, all activity would stop in the entire field and stay silent until the body was brought in. This is at the medical examiner's office, and the tent outside is an ASPR tent. So on Sunday, they brought one of the trailers from one of our hospitals in Everett. They needed a tent, rather than bringing the body straight into this holding area that normal everyday business they would do. They needed someplace to be able to wash the bodies because they were so covered with mud. So we set up the tent, and on a daily basis, that's what they were using. So it was neat to see ASPR equipment being utilized and, work in an emergency like it was supposed to. So the flooded houses, as far as environmental health issues, and I'm going to turn that back to Katie. Again, I take her time.
That's okay. So these are the kind of things that our environmental health staff were dealing with. The homes that were just flooded, they needed to know, how do you properly clean up after a flood? How do you clean the mud out? How do you make sure that you don't start getting mold in your home? How do you clean your personal possessions, like your photographs that you want to keep that are now covered in muddy debris? So they worked really hard to get that information out to the community on how to clean the equipment. We also had to work with Snohomish County Public Works, who they had set up the area where they were cleaning off the personal property. And then we had to work with the sheriff's office, because that's where they were taking guns, jewelry, really valuable items were going to the sheriff's office, and people had to prove that that was really their property. And so we had to work with them on how to clean that kind of stuff, because they were worried about bringing that stuff into their evidence room. They didn't want what they felt might be potentially contaminated material in their evidence room. And the septic systems were the biggest concern. I talked to one of our environmental health staff after the fact, and what they're pretty sure happened is, as that slide was coming down, it was just on the surface, so it took everything out on the surface. But septic tanks were buried, so they probably weren't disturbed at all. They just got buried even more. So the potential for that sewage waste to be out in the mud, they felt was a pretty low risk. But at the time, you certainly don't know that. And they did some water sampling of the water that was backed up and then some other standing puddles. And it came back better than what we let people swim at in the beaches. So it really wasn't that big of a concern. And they were certainly unsure about the chemicals that people could have in their households. But certainly at your own home, you don't have, it's not like we didn't have any fertilizer plants out there. There wasn't that much that could possibly be in somebody's home unless, maybe there was a meth lab out there, but probably not. As Nancy talked about, we had a call one day of a potential foodborne illness among the first responders. So we sent our environmental health staff out to do some inspections of the donated foods. And then as the Southern Baptists came in with their mobile kitchen, DNR came in with their mobile kitchen, they all have to be inspected. They can't just come and set up shop because it's a disaster and expect that they don't have to properly handle food. We had to have that done. And then one of the things, as Nancy stated, there were wells out there. All of the houses out there are on their own well. And with the flooding, there was a potential for those wells to possibly become contaminated. And we got the initial estimate of it was going to cost $100,000 to test the wells. And, at that time, everybody goes, okay, health districts, how are you going to pay for that? And we went, we can't pay for that. So luckily, Department of Health stepped up. They had some money from FEMA to get the testing done. And we just recently got the results of those tests back. There was one well that had a little bit of arsenic in it, but arsenic is naturally occurring in our state, so they didn't think it was necessarily because of the slide. It just was already out there. So we had staff who were asked to participate in the debris removal task force. There was one point when public health was asked to declare the debris piles a public health hazard. And we said, well, it's just mud and trees and some household debris. That's not really a public health hazard. And we had a lot of pushback from people who really wanted us to use our authority, declare this a public health hazard. It could have opened up potentially some funding issues. And we really had to stand our ground and say, trees and mud are not a public health hazard. So they had to work with Public Works and do some other things to get the money to clear out all of those debris piles. As I talked about, we provided technical assistance where they were cleaning the personal property and at the sheriff's office. So every day as they found potentially hazardous material, they would bring it to a site, and Summer's County Public Works would come out once a day with a big trailer, collect it all, and take it away. So there's oil cans, and there's barbecue propane tanks. Not really, this was the most of the piles that I saw. I didn't ever see bigger piles than that. It's just that kind of typical debris that you normally would have in a house. They had to set up hand washing stations because they were out where there was no infrastructure for that kind of stuff to be set up. One of the things we had to do after the fact is some people were brushing their teeth with this water. And it's great for washing your hands, but it's not for drinking or eating or things like that. So we had to put a big sign, don't brush your teeth with this water.
So other things we dealt with through ESF 8, we've talked for a lot of years about patient tracking and how would we do that. And I knew it was always a challenge. I didn't have any answers for it, and all of a sudden it became a real issue. I mentioned we didn't know where the patients were going. There was one point Saturday, just a couple hours into this, I heard from somewhere that somebody was being taken to Harborview. So I called Harborview, got a social worker on the phone, And I said, I'm Nancy Furness from Snohomish Health District. I'm trying to begin this response to Oso. I understand somebody is coming in. Can you help me? Who else do you have there? And she trusted who I was, believed me, and gave me the information I needed. But looking at the potential for the patient tracking that could have happened had this been an event where people were injured and needing critical care versus the fatalities, it would have really been a real difficult issue for us. So we still have a lot of questions and a lot to get answered on patient tracking. Again, mental health, who can provide the services, what agencies do we need to work with, and who owns this? Mental health is under ESF 8 and the Emergency Support Function 8. We have no mental health capacity within our agency. We know that it's necessary and we've got partners, but we're actually trying to get mental health under ESF 6, which is the Red Cross, in order for them to take the lead on it, and so that is a work in progress. Veterinary services were another big issue. We had the animals from the families who were lost and had lost their homes, and we had a lot of search dogs out there. So the issues about if they were hurt or ill, who could help, we had a lot of veterinary offices calling. We actually had a packet of resources for people calling from veterinary offices saying, this is what I can do. I have mobile resources, or the animals would need to be brought in. This is what I can do to help, and we had that packet available at the Emergency Operations Center. Volunteer safety was another issue, particularly on the Darrington side. This is a very wooded area. They are loggers. They're self-sustaining, and they know how to dig through debris. They've got equipment of their own. They wanted to come in with that, but we had to be very concerned about volunteer safety. And who was taking care of them? We had the safety officers for the responders, but who was taking care of the safety of those people that were out volunteering and saying, you're not stopping us. We know what we're doing and we're coming in. And they were very, very valuable, but it was difficult to handle. I mentioned critical incident stress management teams. We had multiple requests come in for those teams. And there was a lot of questions about how to begin contacting a critical team, what deploys them, how to track who's already been out. Again, the mental health tracking was quite an issue. I think good response overall, but just all the glitches of trying to figure out who was doing what.
So this is leading up into the slide site. This is where they set up one of their command posts. They had porta potties, and then we had all these tents set up here for people to check in. This road was blocked off by county sheriff and Washington State Patrol. They would take turns so that everyday public couldn't just go up this road. You had to have official business to get up there. They set up eye-washing stations just in case people needed to use those. This is I had to crop it. There's people in the picture. But this is going through the decon tent where they were washing off the mud. And here's a bigger picture of what they were going through. So they had the big water trucks out there. And then the people would come through as they were going off shift and get cleaned off, wash their boots off, and the mud that they'd gotten onto their clothes. And there were a lot of homemade signs out on site just because of necessity. They just, when they first started up the command posts and they needed to get things done, they just used whatever resources were on site. So as you can see, your PPE sign here of what you needed to be wearing. And a lot of the stuff, people were calling our health officer and asking him what should be worn. And yes, our health officer is a medical doctor, but he's not a everything doctor. So for him, it was very challenging on what kind of recommendations do I have the authority to make and the knowledge to make, and what are the kinds of things that the safety officer needs to be doing. And then a medical branch director from PVIT came on site and was like, well, now how does this doctor integrate in? What's his role? So it's very hard if it's not clearly defined on who should be doing what when you now have 3 different people doing it, and no one was taking responsibility. So that was a challenge.
So we had various incident command and incident command posts, and another challenge that, because this incident was so big and it was so many agencies involved, we'd never had an exercise even close to dealing with this many agencies. So we had our own incident command. This is at the Snohomish Health District. Ashley's up in that side, that corner there. She was the one from King County helping us with the Family Assistance Center work that day. We were trying to figure out. But this is just a picture of us in our operations center, which is simply a conference room set up, and we bring our laptops in. So nothing fancy, but we do have some electrical, the connections coming down from the ceiling where we can plug in, but we have nothing fancier than that. The Arlington Incident Command Post was the old high school, or an old school, I should say, I'm not sure. Interesting, they had the electricity on, but they had no running water in there. So you can see in the little corner lines and lines of porta potties, because that's all the Incident Command Post had for the month, whatever they were there. This is an on-site command post, again, where decisions were being made. So we had our own agency, other agencies had their own command posts. We had the Emergency Operations Center at the county. We had incident command posts in Arlington, and then on-site. So you can imagine some communication issues that were coming along that way. So to and where we're at right now, we've done after action reports. Our focus is on the mental health, the Family Assistance Center, ESF-8 functions are the primary focus for public health. Other agencies are looking at what they need to do as an after action. There is a state commission on coming out and just from an outsider's view, looking at the response. For public health folks, you probably remember John Erickson, if you've been around for very long. John is on that committee, and I actually get to meet with him next week. They want to come out and talk about the fatality management response and just get a personal perspective on that. So a representative from the ME's office and I will be visiting with John next week. Family Assistance Center work, again, is ongoing. We're giving a lot of talks, and I think you were saying that you'd been hearing the emergency manager at the emergency managers conference here. And so everybody's got a different viewpoint, but I think we look at our successes, and there were successes, but we also honestly want to look at what can we do better, because in the big picture, as traumatic as this was, an earthquake in the Puget Sound will be so much bigger and so much more devastating that it was a real wake-up call for us to see what our planning has been and what we need to do. So we've got a lot of work ahead. So questions?
Katie, were you a liaison to the EOC, ESF-8 desk, and your public health agencies? And what did that really entail?
So Susan asked if I was a liaison to the EOC, and I was. So I was working at the ESF-8 desk at the county EOC for the first full week. And what I would do is I would get calls from people, and let me tell you, there's nothing more fun than having the county exec go on TV and say you're going to do something, and then you have to turn around and say, yeah, that's not going to happen, because I had my personal phone, my work phone, and the desk phone all ring at the same time with people yelling at me. So that was really fun. So I would have people from the command post who would call and ask for things. The Seattle Incident Management Team was deployed out there, and a few other incident management teams. They would call sometimes and ask us for things, and then I would work with the health district to deploy either our own staff to do things or to say, hey, we need to get this done. My first day, Tuesday morning, I sat down and I had some man I had never met before come up to me and said, I need you to write a mental health plan and I need it in an hour. And I went, oh yeah, okay, mental health plan. And he walked away and I was like, I wonder what that would look like, because I've never done that. And then we had people calling asking me to deploy the critical incident stress management teams. I had no contacts with those groups of people. I had no idea how to even begin to get them deployed. So it was really hard for us where public health is the lead agency for so much, and yet we don't have that expertise in our department.
So Katie's daytime job, normally daytime job, she's our health educator for our emergency preparedness program. So she was probably by far the most prepared and ready to deal with ESFH just because of all the training and the background that she's got with that. But we brought in people who were basically environmental health specialists. Our vaccine coordinator came in one day and helped. I mean, just basically anybody that we could find and say, you're going to work ESF8 for the day. So another thing that we're doing is after action is Katie's got a great manual for ESF8 with all sorts of resources and just tabs that we can go to if we are sitting at that desk and trying to figure out what to do. Because even as an administrator, I'm hands off from it. And, you know, I lead the program, and yet I don't really know what I'm doing sitting there. So I'd look to Katie or looked at the experts that really know what they're doing. But, yes, we had a lot of people that just had to, you know, by gosh, by golly, kind of get it done. But we have got some good resources that we're starting and doing some ESF training as a result.
Yeah, and I can say they called me up and they said, we need to send some people. Do you have any recommendations? And I said, don't send anyone here who cannot multitask.
Yeah.
You just, I mean, they will cry.
You did anyway.
Yeah.
What are the disciplines where ESF gets besides public health?
We did not have anybody else besides ESF8 there, and actually we were scrunched out. And I told you that they told us no, not to activate on Saturday, and so it was late Monday before they activated. Now we have this beautiful new facility all remodeled for the Emergency Operations Center. And when we've done some exercises there, Public Health had this great space, 3 or 4 chairs. We had a table behind us where some of our partners came in and they exercised with us. That's what I came in prepared to see again.
And a computer.
And the computer. Yes, we had a computer. We had a phone. You know, some basics. And so we got there. The computer got taken by somebody else. Did we have a phone there when you got there?
We had a phone.
We had a phone, okay. And we had 2 scrunched little chairs with other partners, other ESFs scrunching us in. So there was no room for any partners to even come in and work with us. They would just have had to sit on the floor on the side someplace, literally. But the whole place was so full of people. But the ESF8 was, really felt like we kind of got scrunched out. We really did. But we really, it was only public health, and then we would have connections to, we had Red Cross beside us as the ESF8 beside us, and then we did a lot of contacts from ESF8 desk to the health district, and we could make contacts out that way. But we had EMS behind us, and they had consistent people. There were a couple guys that just were in it for the long haul, so they were pretty consistent. But we did have Red Cross next to us. But we did not have any hospital partners. We did not have any ME representatives, and they were too busy. They could not have come anyway other than for a few minutes. They would pop in. So it was strictly public health, finding a computer, getting a phone, and making contacts with our partners that way.
But are you asking if other ESFs were activated?
No, actually, I guess my concern is here you have the Emergency Operations Center set up. And
yeah.
You don't have a hospital representative, you don't have a mental health representative. Some of the disciplines that would allow you to, instead of making a phone call, and I guess probably having a phone,
yeah.
would be the other issue.
Yeah. We did have some mental health people around the building. Green Cross representatives were there, some other mental health folks. But we would often find that they would go off into a room and talk, and we'd have to trail our way in to see what was going on with mental health. That often left the ESF8 desk unattended then. So there was definitely some staffing issues and communication issues within the emergency operations. And again, we had done exercises with them, you know, with our normal partners in the community, but this was so much bigger that no exercise would have prepared us for being able to link in with our partners the way we needed to. So we really, that really created the struggle.
Yes.
So I work at public health in Idaho, and so my mind is just reeling with lots of questions, but I won't take up the time with everybody here. But because we are here for Healthcare Coalition gathering, so can you tell us, do you have a Healthcare Coalition in your region, that local participants, and were they used to support your ESF-8? I mean, it doesn't sound like it, but did that cross your mind, and how did that work?
Okay. The question is about our healthcare coalition in Region 1, and were they utilized, how much, the type of support that they had for ESF-8. I'm very impressed with the work that you're doing, and I was actually not only wanting to come up here and give this talk, but to hear about your coalition and compare. We've got a long ways to go, compared to the organization that you've got. We have come together, and we've always said we're here to help each other. And there were, there were phone calls for help. Actually, interestingly, maybe others in the health district got calls, but I know I got emails and contact from one agency, and that was Spokane, with Susan emailing back and forth saying, how are you doing? Can we help? We'll come if you need. So, I can say that I think the partnerships in Region 1 would have stepped up and been a good help had there been injuries and people hospitalized to deal with it. But in a fatality incident, with Snohomish being such a much larger county than everybody else in our region, everyone else looks to us for resources. They don't particularly have a lot of resources themselves. During this event, there was a measles outbreak in the state. And of all the years, we've got an epidemiologist and we've got public health nurses that will say, we'll go out and help you smaller counties if you have a disease, something that you can't handle. San Juan had measles cases, and they desperately needed help. We had to say no. So from the one time that it's like, they need us, we would have been thrilled to go out and be that support to them, and we were pulling in our own support. So I think with the situation itself, there wasn't a lot that I would have expected our region partners to do. I think it would have been a much different story had there been a lot of hospitalizations. And even with DMCC, the primary DMCC opened, but it was truly for 6 hours, and then that was not needed anymore. And I think hospitals pretty much, after the first day, went back to routine, and there were no issues from their standpoint. Clinics were not involved. Of course, the EMS systems, they were heavily involved in this. And they called in help from other places, but I don't know that they looked to our region coalition specifically to get that help.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, our coalition isn't set up to be a response agency. And I know a lot of others are, and it's an interesting concept because it really could provide you with a great bed of support of as you can see, of wide disciplines to help you out. So it's something that we need to consider.
Well, and I agree. Ours is not set up as a response either. However, mental health and behavioral health is such an integral part under ESF-8. And it'll probably stay there for a while because ESF-6 doesn't necessarily love it. But,
we're begging.
they got their own hands full.
Yeah, they do.
But it'd be interesting to see. My other last question generally is, did you find, and I'll segue into where you're going to end up later, did you find that you used like resource lists when you were sitting at the ESF-8 desk, or were you making them as you were going along?
The question is about, did we have resource lists, or were we making them up as we went along?
We made them up as we went along, and that's not, don't do that. I have this now, I have a giant binder of things that's veterinary, mortuary, medical. This is the things you need to be looking at. These are the resources that are in the county. But yeah, when you're sitting there, and I can tell you, I did not once ever pull any of our plans off of any shelf anywhere because I was so stressed out from the get-go that because you have 500 people coming up and saying, I want this and I want that, and you need to do this and you need to do that. So all of the lovely plans that we had written were like, well, whatever. I can't I don't have time to look at that.
There we go.
Nancy, you mentioned that you and a medical reserve corps volunteer had done some family interviews for the medical examiner's office.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering, had you received prior training on how to do those family interviews, or was that just-in-time training? You were handed a 7-page thing, go do it.
I'm a nurse, so that was my only background. I'd never been trained in interviewing for that type of work. But when we got the call they needed help, they said the request was for someone who could be compassionate and caring and understanding, making very difficult calls to the families. And I didn't know the Medical Reserve Corps volunteers themselves and what personality they had, who would be good and not, and I just said, I'm going. I thought, I can do this. I knew I could handle it. And so I went for 3 days. But no, there was no training other than going in. I have to say, when I went in, I walked in the door of the ME's office, and they were, there was a woman, she's actually the administrator of the agency or something, some administrative level, and she said, oh, Nancy, you came. And I knew her, but I couldn't figure out where I knew her from, other than, a couple meetings, but she was familiar from before that. So finally, about 2 days into it, I said, Heather, I know you, and I don't know where it's from. And she said, I was on your Board of Health, Nancy. Well, she had a different name. She had remarried, had a different last name. She knew me because she recognized me as a staff person that would come to the board meetings. And she knew that I was a nurse. She knew when I walked in and I was from public health, there was a trust that was there. I was more unsure of myself than she was, actually, but that's how it started. But no, there was no other training other than start asking, calling and asking. Yeah.
I have one more question.
Yeah.
So which was it? Did you do things the Fed's way, or did the Feds do things your way?
Did we do things the Fed's way, or did they do it our way? There was a mixture. Yeah. There was truly a mixture. I think there was some give and take in whatever. Communications was another issue. We didn't really touch on that. And I found it really challenging. We'd go back and say, okay, who is the PIO that is going to go to the ME's office? And it would be hours later and we couldn't get an answer. We couldn't get a name. So sometimes, and these were people that were coming in from out of our area to sit at the different EOC functions. So they just had a different perspective on things. And so my going to somebody in communications and saying, I need a name, who's at the ME's office for the public information work, and they'd kind of look at me like, oh, well, kind of thing. So there were some challenges getting them to realize, you've got to talk to us locals. We know these people. You've got to talk to us. And we had to, in turn, share information with them and learn how to talk to them. So in many ways, years ago, if you were back when this all started in about 2002, and particularly with public health and law enforcement, and we did not know how to talk to each other. When we started getting the anthrax, the white powder stuff, they didn't know our language, we didn't know theirs, and it was really a challenge to say, let's talk together, and just how to talk. And I think at this huge level, it was pretty much that same thing. Their languages, their expectations, their practices, we all come in with our own view and how we thought things should do. So there was a lot of give and take.
And I can say the feds know the NIMS resource typing because I had the federal medical branch director call me up and request a type 3 environmental health team. And I said, what is that? I have environmental health staff. Are they not good enough? What do you really need? So we've had to become familiar with what are the NIMS typed teams, and when people ask for that, what does that really mean? Or can we fill that with our own local staff, or do we have to go up that chain to get these federal resources deployed? So it was quite a learning experience when the feds came on.
FEMA reimbursement has been an issue for our agency. We put in a lot of overtime, and they did reimburse us some for the overtime, but we do not backfill in public health. We just put people into their jobs, and Katie goes for 60 hours out of the week doing her response, and we never backfill to anything else. So that work is sitting. environmental health, any of those folks that responded. So we did not get any help from, the only help we got was from the overtime. So we got a little bit from Feds back, but it was pretty much a hit on our agency for financially.
Thank you all so
Yeah.
much.
And if you want to keep a copy of this presentation, you're sure welcome to if anybody wants it. Sure can.